Welcome back to this episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Greg Story. I'm the president of Dale Carnegie Tokyo, Japan, and I am also a master trainer here at Dale Carnegie. My guest today is an old friend of mine, Greg Lyon. Greg, welcome.
Thank you. Happy
now,
to be
you
here.
are the president of Gregory Lyon Inc., and you have your own business here, and you're in the office furniture business, I guess, amongst other things. But why are you here running your own business in Japan? Why are you in Japan? How did you get here? How did you get to run your own business?
It's a good question. I moved here in 1997 to teach English on the JET program. I think the original plan was to be here for 3 years, and here I am 25 years later, or 24 years later.
So why come to Japan in the first place?
So I studied, obviously we all study history. Most of that was focused on European history, American history. I think the only thing I knew about Japan at the time was basically that we'd gone to war with them, and I'd heard stories from my great uncles. And I'd studied in Spain, and I'd done a few things, but Japan and Asia in general were really interesting to me because I had no firsthand experience, and I had no background in Asia. So
Where are you from in the States?
I grew up in Connecticut, outside New Haven.
Right. Right. So you're not sort of Midwest, you're right on the coastal area there.
I'm on the coast, but it's a pretty rural area of Connecticut. It's probably more similar to the Midwest than it is to the East Coast.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So JET program, you found, okay, JET program, here's a way to go to Japan. And on the JET program, do they wind up sending you out in the boondocks somewhere like a lot of people, or you were plunked down in Tokyo or Osaka or something?
So similar to where I grew up, I was placed in Saitama, which is close to Tokyo, but where I was in Saitama was miles away. I was across the river from Gunma.
Okay.
So very similar to Connecticut, I was close to New York, sort of, but not anywhere near it. So it took me an hour and a half to get to Tokyo.
Wow, okay. And I guess, there's probably not a lot of English going on in the depths of the deep north of Saitama, right?
No, there wasn't. I was a how do you say it? I wasn't very common. Foreigners weren't very common out there. Had a lot of people asking the stereotypical questions of foreigners. It was great though. It was a great experience because when people talk about the real Japan, I experienced, I guess, what people would call the real Japan.
As opposed to Tokyo, Japan.
As opposed to Tokyo, yes, correct.
So you're 3 years in the JET program. And
2. I was there for 2.
Sorry, 2. Mm-hmm. Okay, so time to go home, but you don't go home.
Right. So I was on the JET program for 2 years, but then I decided to study Japanese for about 6 months.
Okay.
So I did that full time, and at the same time I looked for a job. I'd figured that with the time I'd spent in Japan, I didn't want to just lose what I'd experienced, and I figured I would use that to get to something else in Japan, although I hadn't really defined what that something else might be. I decided to stay in Japan. It was interesting, and I turned the corner of living in Japan to the point where I was really starting to enjoy it. First couple of years, actually, the first 6 months were tough. After about sort of 18 months, I really started to enjoy Japan, and then I decided I didn't really feel like leaving.
Well, the bright lights of Tokyo beckoning you to come?
Yes, so the plan was to move to Tokyo, correct.
So what did you do for work?
Right. My first position was with a freight forwarding company.
Oh, okay.
So I did that for about 16 months. And then after a while, decided I really wanted to get interest into things that had factories and products and manufacturing and shipping and the whole 9 yards when you're looking at
Why?
business. Services were great. It's interesting. The issue with the services we were providing is there wasn't anything tangible at the end of it. At the end of the day, I was shipping someone to someplace else, and I never got to see where they were going. And a lot of it just felt sort of like paperwork. And I wanted to feel and see exactly what I had done, what I had accomplished. And with furniture, when we deliver a project and I go into the office before it opens and you see 1,000 desks and chairs and carpet and filing cabinets and the lights are off and no one's there, you can look around and say, this is really interesting. We started with nothing and now here we are with thousands of tons of product here.
So you've spent 16 months in freight forwarding, and then this is for a Japanese company?
No, it was for a a regional freight forwarding company, a household goods freight forwarder.
Okay.
At the time it was called Global Silverhawk. Now it's Santa Fe.
Oh, okay. Santa Fe,
Right.
yeah, I've heard of that, right? So what's the next step
The next step
in terms of career?
for me.
Yeah, after the freight forwarding.
Oh, after freight forwarding. So I put my name in for a position at Herman Miller. I actually had an ex-girlfriend who was working there. And I interviewed, and my boss at the time was reluctant to hire me because apparently he'd employed girlfriends and boyfriends before, and I guess it didn't go very well. And so at the very sort of on our last interviews, took about 6 months. One of the last interviews, I said to him, I said, "Listen, I spend enough time with my girlfriend. She's great, but that's not the reason why I want to work here. I don't want to come here so I can spend more time with her. I want to get into furniture and manufacturing, and I'd really like this job." So within a couple months after that conversation, I started.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. So you obviously persuaded them to give you a shot at Herman Miller, but
Right.
you didn't know anything particularly about furniture, and so that was quite a big step. So what were you doing there?
So it takes about 18 months to understand the furniture industry. That's something I didn't believe. My boss told me, he goes, "It's going to take you 18 months before you can do anything," which of course I saw that as a challenge, but he was 100% right. It took me a good amount of time before I understood exactly what I was talking about. It's a pretty detailed industry, and you're dealing with people such as architects and designers who have a really good understanding of furniture, better than most new furniture salespeople. And so for about 18 months, it was a good amount of training. I was going back and forth between Korea and Japan. I also managed the Korean market. And eventually, it was 2001, 2002 at the time, and there was really nothing happening in Japan because of the dot-com implosion. So I went to my boss and said, "Listen, we've got a lot more opportunity in Korea than we do in Japan right now, especially for me. So there's low-hanging fruit in Korea." Said I should just move there and manage Korea full-time for you. It would make more sense instead of spinning my wheels in Japan.
You went for that?
So he did. He did. Eventually.
Eventually.
I went and found an apartment, and I came back from one of my trips when we were delivering a project, and I said, "Okay, listen, I've got an apartment. I'm ready to go."
Whoa,
And-
okay,
and-
that's
and
really
that's
forcing
that.
the issue.
Well, he'd agreed to it.
Oh, he had, okay.
So I said, "Okay, well, we're either going to do it or we're not going to do it."
yeah.
And he goes, "Okay, well, give me a few weeks. I'll get it sorted."
Is your boss Japanese?
No, he was British.
British, okay.
He was British. And so October, November of 2002 is when I moved to Seoul.
How long were you in Korea?
3 years.
Okay, and so you were starting the business not from scratch, but you were the first boots on the ground there, or?
Correct. We had someone that was always managing the market, but I was the first person to be there more or less full time. We also had an outsourced manufacturer there, which we hadn't really leveraged before. And as their capacity and as their scope of work increased, we were able to leverage that even more. I mean, I had some of the fastest lead times for some of the Herman Miller products in the world.
Wow.
The facility was in Incheon,
Wow.
and I was down the road in Seoul.
Seoul, it's not far.
It was great.
And so did you start hiring people and expanding the operation there?
No, what I did is I brought on some independent distributors,
Okay.
and then I worked with our outsourced manufacturer to provide services, importation, deliveries, trucking, warehousing, and then I had other folks that I brought on as on the sales side as distributors.
These are direct employees or
Nope.
contract? Okay, or
No,
contractors.
they were
So very
independent
light,
companies.
very light touch then.
Entirely light. I mean, it's very light. We had no employees except myself.
Right. Okay. So are you there for how many years? Or 3 years? Did you say?
Yeah, 2002 to 2005.
And why aren't you still in Korea?
It's a good question. My boss began talking to me about moving back to Japan. We'd done a lot of good work in Korea. And I thought at the time we were topping out, and we needed some more help back in Japan. And I think my boss probably knew at some point he'd be retiring, and he wanted to bring me back into the fold before he left the company, so I'd be amongst the main office in Japan, because I was still reporting to the office in Japan. And he wanted to bring me back in and help develop some more business here and still manage Korea.
Okay, so you come back, and are you in charge of any teams at this stage, or you're an independent unit?
Right, so I was in charge of Korea entirely, so I was managing all of our distributors there. We brought on an employee through one of our distributors, and then when I came back to Japan, I was managing the multinational business. So
Did you have staff at that time?
I did. I had, I can't remember how many people I had reporting to me, 4 or 5.
Right. Was this the first time to have Japanese staff reporting to you?
It was the first time I had Japanese staff, yep.
So, very interesting. You've been in the Korean culture, the Korean language, the way of doing business there. You've had distributors, contract distributors working for you. You've brought on an employee, so you're running the operation there. You come back to Japan. Now you're running a Japanese team. Presumably you're all Japanese people in your team?
All Japanese, correct.
So what were some of the challenges you found as becoming a leader? Because, you've been in Connecticut, you've been teaching English in Whoop Whoop in Saitama.
Right.
Then you're off to, Herman Miller, 18 months trying to work out what this industry means, off to Korea, back to Japan. So this is really your first tasting of being an actual leader. What were some of the challenges you found? And what are some of the contrasts you found between leading in Japan and leading in Korea?
That's a good question. I think when you're working in Japan, especially for a Western brand, I think there's 2 sets of rules that you're going by. You're going by the Western brand's rules in terms of marketing and in terms of going to market, in terms of how you manage your business, how you engage with clients, and then you have the Japanese side of things, which is very different. So bridging that gap can be a challenge. If you're in an office of mainly Japanese staff, they're typically going to adhere to the Japanese way of doing things. That seems to count more. The corporate side always seems to take a back seat to the Japanese side. So bridging that gap and finding a way to engage with clients based on what the company's line is and getting that to translate in the Japanese way is tough.
You've got a very strong personality.
I've been told.
You've been told that, haven't you? And I know that because I've known you for a long time.
Right.
So I can imagine when you've got a very strong personality, it's in your mindset that, well, I've got to get these people to fly right. That means the way I fly. So how do you adjust to that, where this is their country, their culture, their language, their business environment? We're not Japanese, we're foreigners. We've got strong personalities, but as you say, we've got to bridge that. How did you go about adjusting yourself? Because really, it's got to come from us, because Japan's got to change to suit us. We've got to change to suit Japan. How did you go in that adjustment?
Right. I actually had 360-degree interviews with our staff, which is pretty uncomfortable. And I had a feeling I knew which way that feedback was going to come in.
Was this a sort of biannual Herman Miller type of 360-degree survey, or is this something that you initiated for yourself?
It was something that Herman Miller did.
Anyway,
and it was something. It wasn't something that we did regularly. It was the culmination, I think, of sort of 6 or 8 months of stuff that the company was doing, which I thought was great. Thought it was really useful, and I thought it was really interesting. Myers-Briggs and 360-degree interviews, and basically, the feedback for me was that I didn't have as much patience as I should have, and they said once people understood the background behind my opinions, it was relatively easy for them to agree with me. But because I was so forthright and because I was so quick to say something, the automatic response was to resist it, which I guess would happen in the U.S. as well. I didn't really like taking a lot of time to explain every nuance of every opinion that I had, and I would just say it, and eventually people would come around.
So if I need your opinion, I'll give it to you. Is that the sort of idea?
Yes.
Right.
I suppose.
At what point did you start to switch that around? Because that only takes you so far. And as you say, you're getting this 360 feedback and you're starting to realise So after the aha, what did you do?
Well, I still remember the 360-degree interviews. I still remember the feedback I got.
Did you keep it? Have you got it in a drawer somewhere?
I do have it. And I keep the Myers-Briggs stat. I have all of it. I thought it was really interesting. I think part of it came with age, and part of it came with listening to the feedback. And eventually I realized that there probably was a better way of approaching things. So I could never out Japanese the Japanese in terms of cultural stuff and how to get along in an office and how to do this and memo washing and all that. And so instead what I did is I focused entirely on projects and clients.
So nemawashi is groundwork. It's like setting up things before a meeting so that when you get in the meeting, you're basically rubber stamping the agreement,
right,
as opposed to a Western model where we go into the room, we debate, we decide, and we move on. So the nemawashi is the groundwork. So yeah, please go on.
Right. So I focused on clients and projects. And anytime there was an issue with a client or a project, I was 100% focused on that issue and that project and that client. And that helped me gain some trust and some respect amongst colleagues, because it wasn't.
So this is because you're bringing in the business. Is that because we find a lot in Japan. We do sales training, obviously, in Dale Carnegie. And one of the things that clients often say to us is, look, we've got a lot of salespeople here who are great farmers. They can really be good account managers, but we need hunters. We lack hunters. It's hard to find hunters. And we find there's a lot of, when we try and get the Japanese sales staff to go out there and get new clients, bring in new business, there's a lot of resistance and we don't see much traction. So you find someone who can do that. So I'm imagining that if that's similar in Herman Miller at the time, that someone like you who's going to go out there and find new business and then you bring it in and they've got to deal with it, that would have been taking a lot of weight off their shoulders, I guess.
Correct. And also we had a lot of global accounts that I would help manage. And those global accounts, a lot of the decisions were made overseas. And so a lot of times I would spend most of my time and effort speaking to those clients and those decision makers overseas, trying to translate what was happening in Japan to them in a way that they would understand. Most people don't realize that for the most part, for example, customs is closed on weekends. And so if you're stuck with a schedule and you're trying to get stuff in, and customs is closed on Saturday and Sunday and it's only open 9 to 5 during the week, you're going to be late because it's just everything winds up getting backed up. So they can't understand, for example, why you can't clear customs on a Saturday. So if I'm explaining it to them after having done this for a number of years, it takes pressure off of the local decision makers, because then the foreign non-Japanese decision makers say, oh, okay, well, customs isn't open. Right.
We'll adjust to it. So what about with your team? You're able to get them engaged, I guess, to follow, what you're doing in the business. You've got a team. What were some things you're doing to get them more engaged? Engagement's
a good question. I think for me, since I run my own business here, it's different from a non-Japanese company operating in Japan.
So let's contrast engagement when you are not the owner.
Right.
So we've got a couple of layers for you. One is employee with other employees. You're the boss of that group. You've got to engage that group. And also, we'll get to the point where you're going to talk about your own business and engaging your own team and your own company. So we'll contrast that in a minute. But just in terms of the Herman Miller group who are reporting to you, what did you do? You've had your 360, you've got some insight, you've got some awareness. What are you doing to engage that group?
I think the thing that helped me the most was that when the staff that I was managing saw that I wasn't trying to just score points with the overseas office or the senior sales staff or the senior account managers in the US, and I was actually trying to help them solve issues locally, and that by solving issues overseas, it was helping them solve issues or prevent issues in Japan. That really helped me. It wasn't about anything. It wasn't about anything other than helping them and helping them get through issues and avoid issues and circumvent problems that may come up and
so
making their lives easier.
You're doing this as a business professional, right? You see the issue, you solve the issue. And in the scope of solving that issue, you're solving the issues for the Japanese team members in your group.
Correct.
Were you communicating that to them? Were you saying to them, look, I'll take care of this so that you collectively are able to do your job better. Were you aware enough to communicate that, or were you just doing it and imagining that they would understand?
So I think a lot of times, I can't remember specifically telling them that I was going to do it. I think that would have been a little bit counterproductive.
Was it? Mm-hmm.
I think so. I think we would have had conference calls before. This is before video calls. We would have had conference calls where the Japanese staff would have known about the issue, and the overseas staff would have known about the issue. And just by taking the lead and solving it with everyone in the room, getting everyone on the same page, that was more effective than me telling them, I'm going to do this for you.
Okay, gotcha. And so another issue too, for foreigners with Japanese is trust. And there's a whole raft of issues around trust, but if you've got engagement, then you can get innovation. And, you can also trust as part of that. But one of the issues, it's a very competitive environment. Any business in this country is in a competitive environment. There's no, we don't have a strong competition or strong rivals in this country. There's lots of them. So what were you doing to encourage innovation, and what were you doing to build trust with the team?
I think there's two parts of it. I think it's the company's attitude toward overseas markets, and then it's the leadership that's in place. And I think if the company has an opinion, basically, that they're going to take into account local market preferences, and they're going to take into account how the local staff wants to approach certain issues, and that goes. It has to be more than lip service. I think if that's practiced daily, I think naturally you get employees who are more engaged, and I think that leads to a point where you can get some innovation from your staff. If the company is overly strong from the home market and it tends to mitigate or relegate some of the local staff, they might stick around because it might be a cool foreign company to work for, but they're not going to be very engaged.
Well, things like furniture. I remember, I'm not a great baseball fan, being from Australia, like cricket. But I remember going to watch baseball in Nagoya and the public stadium there. And the seats, like I'm not a huge Western guy, I'm not particularly big, but they were like really tight. And I remember thinking, wow, this is really tight seating because they were designed for a Japanese physique. So if you're a supplier of, for example, Western seating in that type of business, your seats are going to be really wide, and you won't be able to cram as many people in as they do in Japan. So simple things like that, the physicality of height, table height, seat size, that type of thing. Were the Japanese team helping to innovate for sizing differentials, height differentials for the Japanese market? Were they able to have any input into that?
So table heights are pretty standard around the world. It's about 730 millimeters high off the ground. Those are pretty standard. The seat height actually it's an interesting, or the seat size is an interesting question. I kept getting that feedback from Japanese clients. They kept telling me that American furniture is way too big for them. So I started thinking, I was like, wow, that's interesting. I said, because Toyota is the number one sold car, I think, in the US even now. And obviously cars have seats in them. And I was thinking, like, either there's a bunch of Americans who love these cars with seats that are way too small for them, or actually it doesn't matter, and that seat size is basically the same. So I actually contacted some folks that I knew at Toyota and asked them specifically about their seat sizing and whether they're different between Japan and the US. And even Toyota uses something, I'm going to get the acronym right, AMA, the average American male, AAM, is what they use. So those seats are fitting 90 to 95% of American males, and they're the same seats in Japan as they are in the US.
Oh, they have the same sizing.
Right. And so when I brought that up to certain clients, that negated a lot of that seat sizing. There are some things about U.S. furniture that's bigger and more aggressive looking, I suppose, thicknesses, bases of chairs, but by and large, the actual seat pan where you're sitting, it's more or less the same size. It just has I think Japanese products may have a slimmer profile.
Okay. So there wasn't really a lot of innovation needed from the Japanese team. Okay. And what about trust? How did you build trust with the team?
So again, I was helping them solve issues through non-Japanese decision makers, either in Japan or overseas. And that was really able to clear the path for them. There's two sides of our clients. You have the non-Japanese side, who rightly or wrongly typically will sign the checks for things and then make the decisions. That's usually the side that I've dealt with. The other side, which is equally important, is the Japanese side, who has to go and implement all of these projects and get everything done. So both sides have to feel comfortable. Both sides have to be attended to. And so if I can help the decision-making side, it clears the path for the rest of the folks.
So at some point you decide to leave Herman Miller and start your own company. So what was the impetus to do that? How long were you at Herman Miller before you jumped out?
I left, I think I was there a total of 9 years.
Okay.
And I had just finished my MBA, and I went to the leadership.
So you were doing it part-time? You're doing it while you're working? Or?
I was doing it, yeah. I did an executive MBA. And I went to the leadership and I said, I know you want to change the business model in Japan. At the time we were selling direct, we didn't have any distributors. And I said, I know we've talked about changing the business model in Japan and having distributors. I'm happy to help however I can help. I can take a regional sales position. I can start a dealership that's focused on multinational corporations. You can let me know whichever way you want me to go. I'm happy to do it. I didn't get the clearest answer, which is a little bit disappointing. I didn't get the clearest answer, so I said, okay, that's fine. I'll start my own dealership. Here I am, sales guy. I was in Korea. I'm in Japan. I felt pretty confident in what I might be able to achieve. So I said, well, I might as well test out all of my learning in my MBA that's now hanging on the wall. I might as well see how well I can do.
And when you did the MBA, did you, like a lot of people, they use their MBA as a means of honing a business plan. They may not start with a particular direction when they begin the MBA, but during the process, they're starting to think, well, okay, I'm going to use this to work on a project that will become a business or become a new direction for me. Was that something you were doing in the MBA, or you just sort of did the straight MBA and then afterwards you thought, okay, dealership or bigger regional role?
It was both. The reason I got my MBA in the first place was I'd heard all these acronyms and business terms that people were using, and I kept thinking, wow, those guys are brilliant. I want to know what those words mean. So sort of halfway through the MBA program, which was a great program. I did it through UCLA and the National University of Singapore. I sort of realized, thinking, wow, this is great, but I really feel like I should test this. And so towards the end, in the entrepreneurship program, one of the assignments was to create a business plan for either internship within a company entrepreneurship within a company or starting your own business. So my project became creating a business plan for the dealership that I started in 2008. So I did both. It's both. Long story short, both.
So at that time, were there many dealerships in Japan?
We had very, very limited dealerships, and basically they were selling chairs. So it's
selling shares. So,
chairs.
Chairs. Just selling chairs. Okay, right. So you decide, okay, I'm not getting a clear answer here. I choose dealership. So now you're on your own. You have to start hiring people. You have to go and get your office. You have to get, you've probably got customers, I guess, because you know a lot of people. But, trying to get Japanese to join big companies is not that easy, particularly in the past. So what year are we talking about when you started your business?
2008.
2008, right? So that's a fair while ago. And we started our business here as our franchise in 2007 when we bought it. And it was very hard to get people to come and work for us. Very hard. So how were you able to persuade people to join a one-man band here, brand new? Yes, it's the Herman Miller brand, but this is your dealership. How did you convince them to come on board? It
was terribly hard. I made a lot of mistakes.
What sort of mistakes did you make?
Well, I mean, the usual mistakes for a startup. I was undercapitalized, and I didn't have the right combination of employees especially in a developed market like Japan. I underestimated how difficult it would be to get people on board. And then once they were on board, I underestimated how long it would take them to come up to speed and be able to satisfy Japanese clients. So it's pretty tumultuous, especially 2008. Not only would you have the normal issues, you have the financial crisis.
Lehman shock too, yeah. Nice timing.
Yeah, so for 3 years, I was in startup mode.
So what was the thing that convinced people to join you? Now, I'm hearing that probably you were taking bodies at an early stage to get someone in the office to do work, as opposed to being incredibly fussy. I've got my checklist here. Oh no, sorry, you're not going to meet my requirements. You're happy to get someone on board, right? But what was the pitch you were giving them to come on board?
So the pitch was that it's a good question.
Well, I imagine, 2008, I'm an employee, potential employee. For some reason, I know that you're looking for staff. Were you using recruiters, or were you doing it on job boards, or?
I did both. Did both. Recruiters were a luxury that were difficult.
Very expensive,
to afford
right?
at the time.
Expensive at that time. Yeah.
I was taking people that I knew.
Oh, okay.
And people that I'd worked with before, previous companies or from Herman Miller as well. I took some younger folks. I used a recruiter to find an office manager, and then other than that, it was people I knew or new employees.
Okay.
People who wanted to
the
work.
People who knew you, that's they understand the business, they know you, that's okay. But for people who don't know you, don't know the business, how do you convince them? Because a lot of the people who are watching this program, listening to this podcast, will be thinking, well, yeah, I'm having trouble still getting people and convincing them to come and join me. There's a war for talent on at the moment in Japan, no question about that. What are some things I could be doing to convince people to join me?
So from my perspective at my company, we really focus on what my ex-boss called the hot edge of things. So we're really focused on clients and projects and getting things delivered. And as I was saying before, I mean, my key focus is on projects and clients and delivering projects. So the rest of this stuff in terms of office politics or those sorts of things don't really exist. So we're really focused on doing what it is we say we do. The rest of this stuff doesn't really matter that much. And so in terms of rules or hankos or long lists of things that you have to do, if I send you overseas, I don't expect you to write a report. I treat people like adults. People can see what the company does. It's very straightforward. And if we hire someone, very clear about what that role is. So if you know what the company does and you know what your role is, not necessarily going to tell you what to do on a daily basis. I'm going to treat you like an adult, and I expect you to do what it is you know needs to be done.
Now that's interesting, because a lot of cases in Japan, people are waiting. Tell me what to do, boss. Don't ask me to think, boss. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it perfectly.
Right.
So you've got this sort of cultural passiveness, I guess, passivity. Tell me what to do, I'll do it, because actually I don't want to take any responsibility. So if you tell me what to do and it doesn't go well, that's your fault, not my fault. So there's that risk denial there as well. So, you've now got a philosophy of, I'm treating you like an adult. You know what you've got to do, go and do it, in a culture where it's really tell me what to do. So how did you get around that? Right.
So it starts in the interview process from the very first day. I tell people, I think right now I've got 9 staff. 9 staff, it's relatively big, but it's a small company. And so if you're not pulling your weight, it becomes very obvious very quickly that you're not doing what you need to do. And it doesn't affect me so much on a daily basis, but it's going to affect other staff. And if you're not doing what you need to do and your work winds up shifting to someone else, it's going to be very uncomfortable. So from the very beginning, I say, it's a small company. You're going to need to pull your own weight. I'm not going to tell you what it is you need to do every day. Some people are intrigued by that. Others decide to opt out of the process at that point. In my experience, those are those staff who are interested, who really take accountability for themselves, perform the best. And I think I do the same with my children. Not that my employees are the same as children, but I think the more I treat them like adults, the more they're going to respond that way. And on the flip side, it's also true. If you treat people like children, they're going to react in kind, and that's not a good scenario. Once you go down that path where people are acting like children, you've got to treat them like children and start micromanaging people.
So, you talked before, you started in 2008, perfect timing. We started in 2007, perfect timing too, and it was horrendous. You have got a period of economic disruption going on around you. It's a meltdown. Japan's affected by it too. The whole business, just goes down across the board. How do you keep people engaged in a new company, new dealership, in a downturn? Because if they're with, big Inc. company, there's plenty of cash and, they're going to survive it. They get the banks behind them. They're going to be okay. People know if I join size, there's safety in size, safety in that numbers game. You're a small company. Are they worried about, is this going to go under? Are we going to go under? Am I going to lose my job? How did you ride those 3 tumultuous years of the startup?
Oh, it's a good question. I basically had to start the company over after 3 years. So once we'd gotten through, I finally wound up getting some good opportunities coming in, where I really had a good hold of the opportunities. Clients were really interested and comfortable in working with us. But around 2011, we'd gone through such a long, difficult period that staff were certainly worried about their futures, and they were worried about what things were going to look like years down the road. And so I actually, for almost 100%, I restarted the entire organization.
You mean turn the people over?
So some people were let go, some people quit. And so that basically culminated with the earthquake and the tsunami.
I was going to say, 2011, what happened in 2011? Earthquake, tsunami, nuclear meltdown, another big, and actually, I don't know about your case, but I found Lehman shock was a bit of a gradual decline, whereas 2011 for us was a cliff. It was just like kaplunk. It was a training company anyway. But was it like that? Was it a more gradual decline for you, or was it rather sharp?
We had some really good opportunities lined up. The issue for us was that most of our clients at the time were multinationals. They weren't sure what was going to happen in Japan. At the time, everyone was worried. I mean, no one knew radiation and earthquakes. Is Japan going to sink into the ocean? So everything got put on hold. So we finally got to a point where we come through the financial crisis. Some of our clients start moving and investing again. And right when that happened, right when that started, is when the earthquake and the tsunami hit. So it was more or less a continuation of the same low level of business that we'd experienced since 2008. The difference for me was I'd already started bringing on people that I knew from the industry as people were transitioning out. And so I remember for a few days after the earthquake, I was the only person from the company in the office. And so once that scenario finally ended, the new employees started coming in.
Oh, so you actually had people departing. You didn't have a crossover. You didn't have sort of some still there, new ones coming in, then gradually. You actually was like gone, and then new influx.
Right, for the most part, and I think that's in Japan. Maybe not in the U.S. I'm not sure. I think in Japan that's really that's a good thing to follow. When
Why?
People are
Why is
leaving,
that?
let them go. There seems to be when people leave companies in Japan, I wouldn't call it scorched earth, but it doesn't feel like they always leave on the most professional terms for whatever reason.
So what are you saying here? You're saying that when people are leaving, let them go. I mean, you can't chain them to the desk. You know? If they want to leave, they're going to leave. I mean, so what? I don't quite get the point here.
Right. So if someone says, so even when I learned this from my former boss, when someone put in their notice that Herman Miller, my boss would say, okay, that's fine. So then your last day is going to be this week, Friday. You'll clean out your stuff, you give it back your Meishi, and that'll be that. And staff were usually surprised by that. But the reality is, I think when other staff see people who are leaving, and they know they're leaving, but they're still there, I think it does something to the morale. And I think it's almost like pulling a Band-Aid off. You just have to rip it off and move forward.
So what are you saying? You're saying that, like, normally, it's interesting, when you're hiring people, they say, oh, yeah, but I can't start for 2 months because my current company needs me.
Yep.
And you're like, 2 months, I need someone now, and I have to suck it up and wait this 2 months for them to come on board.
Right.
But when my people leave, if they choose to leave, it's like, here's your month, and they have leave because they never take any leave, the Japanese. They've always got massive, 20 days leave or something. So basically their last day is not that long in the office, 2 weeks, and then boom, they're on leave for the rest of the time they're gone. So what are you getting at? What should we be doing here? Are you saying that if someone submits, I'm planning to resign, you say, great, this Friday, you're gone?
So there are times when I've been able to follow my own advice, and there are times when I haven't been able to. So there are times when I had one salesperson for whatever reason was leaving, and my new salesperson wasn't starting for 6 or 8 weeks. I had to grin and bear it, and I had to deal with keeping a person on who I knew was leaving, and being really concerned about the quality of work that they were doing. Other times I've been able to have them exit quickly. And I just think that's best for everyone.
So what you're getting at is you're thinking that, and I don't know whether this is particular to Japan, probably could be the same set anywhere, I guess, that once someone's made up their mind to leave, they've mentally left. So the degree of professionalism they show as they're leaving is obviously going to vary from person to person. But I would assume across the board that you couldn't expect that much from someone who's told you they're leaving and they've already got another job and they're just ready to go, that they're going to work like a Trojan right up to the bell. I can't imagine that to be the same in America or Australia. When they say they're leaving, and you just expect that, okay, you got so many, weeks to, go, and you got leave, and, we're going to have a transition here of your clients or whatever, but we don't expect them to be putting the shoulder to the wheel, nose to the grindstone. We accept that they're just going to ease out. Are you expecting something different?
What I really want to avoid is if someone is transitioning out and then they start coming in late, or they start leaving early, they start mumbling things under their breath, they sort of, maybe they're not looking very appropriate for the office, and they're really flaunting rules or sort of professionalism. I really like to avoid that.
Does that happen in Japan?
I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen.
That's interesting.
Sure. I've seen it happen, especially on, I don't want to say especially on the, necessarily by age, but I think that especially on the younger side, it might happen more. I think so. And I just don't want to lose the respect of the entire office. I think it makes more sense to move on.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So basically, you've turned the entire team over during that 3 years, between Lehman shock and the Tohoku disaster. And so you start again, basically. So you've been through 3 years of startup, and you start again. Now you get new people coming in. You've got to build the whole thing again from scratch. So what do you do? Like, this is your third iteration, right? You did first one at Herman Miller. Phase 2 is Gregory Lyon Inc. Stage 1. Now we're at Gregory Lyon Inc. Stage 2. What was different in Stage 2 from Stage 1?
I'm probably at Stage 3 by now.
Okay.
Probably.
Right.
It's Probably at stage 3. What's different now is we've got a really good base of business, and we've got a good amount of trust in the market. So what I'm trying to accomplish now is, as best as possible, I'd like to have backup in every area of the company, whether it's design, office management, sales. But being able to have that luxury, you have to have the revenue and profit basically to afford all of it. And we're in the fortunate position now where we can. I was hamstrung before because of different things happening in the market and the economy. I couldn't afford to have backup. Whereas now it's a different ball game, and so it gives everyone a lot stronger sense of security.
Even with the pandemic, where people are not working in an office much, they're working from home, and you hear all this talk about people downsizing the real estate, shrinking the office or getting rid of the office, and therefore they don't need office furniture.
Right. So we had the same thing after the .com implosion, and we also had the same thing during the Lehman shock and the earthquake, tsunami. We people always talk about the end of the office. It's never happened. I don't think it's going to happen. For us, we've had a lot of employees of companies, of clients who are working from home, and those employees have been building out their own home offices, or even sort of consultants have built out their own home offices. People are spending more time at home. They invest more in their home. People have to work from home. But there are still office projects going on. We're really fortunate with timing on a couple of projects at the beginning of the pandemic, and then we've got a lot of people buying individual chairs, and then we still have office projects going on. We've been super fortunate. We're as fortunate today as we were as unfortunate back 2008 to 2012, 13.
Yeah. So in terms of your new team, you're going into the pandemic. They've come on board after Tohoku disaster, and so they've been through that recovery period. So they've actually seen the business probably more stabilised, more normal, and now we're hitting the pandemic. So what are you doing to communicate to them? Because for sure, people must worry because they're reading in the media the end of the office, everyone's going to work from home in the future, big corporations saying, okay, we're changing our direction on this. What sort of things are you doing to diminish their concerns about the future?
So every year we have a kickoff meeting. Our fiscal year goes from June till May, and our kickoff meeting is usually around July. Every year we go over this.
Isn't it a bit late to have a kickoff meeting in July when you start in June? No?
So it's a good question. But our financial results aren't really complete until June.
I got you.
So we can't really go over the previous year until we know what it all looked like.
Right.
And I go over the year's performance based on revenue, profit. I go over what we're going to do for the next year. We talk about key clients, key projects, and on a weekly basis, people can see how we're doing against that target. So we'll show the orders, the aggregate orders per month, and then the orders per week of the current month against what the target orders are for the year. So people know exactly how we're doing. Fortunately, for the past, I'd have to add it up, 4 or 5 years, we've paid bonuses. Sometimes a good amount in excess of what's written in the contract, and that's because we've been really fortunate. So I think when you're paying bonuses consistently, and I tell everyone that my goal is to pay bonuses because that means things are working and we're doing what we're supposed to do at a level we're supposed to do it at. If I can pay bonuses, that's a great sign. So if you say you want to pay bonuses and then you actually pay them and you show people how you're doing on a regular basis and they can see it every week, and then what they see is people have new computers. We're investing in more staff. I think in the last year, we've doubled in size in terms of staff. People can see that. So their workload decreases, the number of people increases, and there's not a whole lot that I have to say. I don't have to say we're doing well. People can see it.
They can see it. And so, how do you go about, again, engagement, innovation, trust with this this iteration? What are you doing? You've learned from previous times.
Right.
What are you doing that's different this time?
So I think in the last 5 to 7 years, one thing I've tried to do in particular is when I don't know how to do something, especially if it's a local Japanese issue or a local Japanese decision maker. A lot of times I think I know what the issue is, but I'm not really sure how to address it. The expectations from Japanese clients obviously are different from those of Western clients. I know pretty much how to deal with a Western client. When it comes to a Japanese decision maker or a Japanese client who's spent a good amount of money with us, not always sure of what they expect. And so there's a danger in people going to staff and saying, I don't know how to do this. I'm not sure what to think. I don't know what to do. People are worried about doing that because they think if I say this, people are going to lose respect for me. If you have the right atmosphere in the office and you're proving on a daily basis that you're helping your staff, I think I can go to them pretty regularly and say, listen, this is the issue that I think I see coming, or I think that I see we have. And we're going to need to solve this. And it's a guess, but it's a pretty well-educated guess that we're going to have to solve this. And if we can solve it, we're going to achieve X, Y, and Z. If we can achieve X, Y, and Z, it's going to let us do A, B, and C. I said, the problem is I don't know how to solve this. I think I know what the issue is, but I really don't know how to approach this. I need your help to fix this. And if we can fix it, like I said, we'll be able to achieve A, B, and C. And by and large, I've gotten some good feedback, and I've gotten some good solutions from people.
And in sort of flipping that, do you find that you have an ability to have a closer relationship with your team of trust because you're admitting that you're not almighty, perfect guru, know everything? You're actually saying, look, I am unsure, please help me. Is that creating a tighter bond in the organization than before?
In my opinion, yes. I have staff that knows how to do things that I have no idea how to do. I don't know how to do it. Mm-hmm. I've hired a new office manager, and when I was bringing her on, I said I don't know how to do 90% of the stuff that the previous office manager knows how to do. I said if I can give you some cash to fix something, but I don't know how to do most of what she does. Thankfully, she's also staying on. She's staying on part-time, so she's around for us to ask questions to.
Right, do a handover.
I hire specialists, and I've got designers who've got specific design training. I've got salespeople who really understand certain things about delivering furniture projects in Japan that I don't understand. My Japanese is okay, but for example, I can't fill out the forms that are required to deliver products to a building. Don't know how to deal with the Bosai Center. I don't know how to do any of that. And so they already know that I don't know how to do this stuff, and that's how it should be. I can help them get stuff done. I can help put money towards a problem, but I need to count on them to do the things that they're hired to do.
Mm-hmm. I would say that's a normal expectation, nothing extraordinary about that. But I'm thinking in terms of the contrast between what you're doing before and what you're doing now. Are you able to open up and admit you don't know everything now because something in you has changed? It was maybe before you wouldn't have done that?
I think before I would have felt uncomfortable not knowing how to do something or giving the impression that I don't know how to do something.
And is that because you're the owner of the company? Is that why you feel that pressure?
The pressure to
have to know everything,
I think from certain employees, there's an expectation that the owner should know how to do everything. Mm-hmm. And I think especially when you're looking at a younger group of staff, I think that expectation is there. Mm-hmm. And they'll use that to say, well, Shacho-san doesn't know how to do everything. Look at that. So why should I have to do X if he doesn't know how to do this? Mm-hmm. And I think you wind up getting over that. It's like, well, no, that's not my specialty. I don't know how to do that. Mm-hmm. I don't know everything is filed. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to get that delivered. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to place that order. Mm-hmm. And I think it takes a minute. I think second guessing yourself in Japan is probably happens on a daily basis.
And do you find that whereas maybe in the past you've been the key source of new ideas, innovation, new direction, has that changed as a result that people feel more empowered to come up with ideas, suggestions to you, or it's always no change, it's always been, you've been open to that, or people have not done that because you sort of know everything? I mean, how have you managed to tap into their innovative ideas?
I think it's the atmosphere in the office that's the most helpful.
What does that mean then? What's the atmosphere?
So our atmosphere, I like to think we don't have any politics whatsoever. And so when people come in on a daily basis and they've got stuff they have to do and got stuff that they have things they need to accomplish, if something's impeding that progress, there's no baggage around, well, if I suggest this, it's not going to be implemented, so I'm not going to do it. Or if I don't like that guy, and if I do that, it's going to help him, so I don't really want to help him. We don't, unless I'm wrong, we don't really have any of that that office baggage, and so that I think lends to more of an atmosphere where people are happy to contribute. And if you let people see that we're focused on clients and projects and making things as easy as possible for staff, I think they react the way you'd like them to, which is coming up with innovative ideas.
So what you're saying is that you've built a culture that's very outcome client oriented, and you're not really interested in having, politics and this sort of territorial map of, hey, listen, that's not in my job performance document, so I'm not going to get involved in that.
Right.
You've been able to overcome that by having a culture built around, we're a small team, we group together, we do multiple things to make it work for the client, and that's helped to get around that.
Right.
And what about trust? You've been through Lehman shock, you've been through the Tohoku disaster, we're now in the pandemic. So what are you doing to build trust in the team?
So building trust, I think it's a matter of saying what you mean and meaning what you say and doing it on a daily basis. So whatever that might mean. Some of it comes down to paying bonuses. Some of it comes down to helping people, helping keep people employed. As I mentioned before, we've got an office manager who she basically needs to cut her hours due to some family stuff. Nothing horrendous, but it's things that will keep her from being in the office the way that we'd like her there. And so basically, I found a way of keeping her where everyone got what they needed. And I told her, I said, I'm going to do my best to keep you because you add value. I understand that you can't be here for these days or this amount of time, but if I can find a way to keep you, I'm going to keep you because you're valuable. And we wound up coming up with a solution where everybody was able to gain from it. The company doesn't lose her contributions overall, even though she's going to be out of the office a good amount, and she continues to be a full-time employee for us. And so we have all of her sort of institutional knowledge. And we've also got, I think, we've got some commitment from her, and I think she realizes that in most other companies, this probably wouldn't have worked out for her.
No flexibility.
Right.
And so being a foreign-led company, there's a different flexibility there.
Right.
Yeah, which they won't get. They know they won't get that in a Japanese company.
Right.
So, Greg, if we had to give some thought to leadership in Japan, your experiences, you've also led in Korea, is there anything I haven't asked you about leadership in Japan which I should have asked you?
I think if you're managing an American or Western company in Japan, I think one of the big struggles here is explaining Japan to the overseas headquarters and explaining the overseas headquarters to the Japan office. I think that's a really difficult rope or difficult line to walk. And I think it's very easy to screw up on either side quickly.
What's the secret then?
It's tricky, and it goes to each company, each market, each office. There's a lot of things that go into it. I think for the Japanese side, a lot of it, like you're saying before, comes down to trust. And as long as the Japanese staff sees that their problems are your problems, and you're here to help them, and you're here to help the company in Japan, and you're here to help them generate revenue and achieve their goals or achieve company success in Japan. As long as they see that on a regular basis, I think you're gonna do as well as you can. I think as soon as they see that you're here and you're managing up, and your real focus is talking to the people you report to, you're going to be relegated quickly, and you're going to be boxed in, and you're not going to be able to be effective with the local staff.
So they don't think you're working for them.
Right.
They just see you as a stooge of headquarters.
Who gets the apartment in Roppongi and gets this and gets that. And resentment can build up quickly. And some of it can be a false narrative. And that's really difficult in Japan to get out of. Just because people don't give you their opinion doesn't mean that those opinions don't exist. And it doesn't mean that those opinions aren't being shared. And if you have an incorrect opinion or a false narrative about you, it's really difficult to get out of it. And I can speak from experience.
Okay. So what are some other things people should think about when coming to Japan to set up an operation here or take over an operation here? So
besides basic things, I think understanding the Japanese history, at least 20th century history, I think that's really important to do. I don't think it can be stressed enough to understand exactly how far Japan came in such a short period of time. And that's affected everyone. There were samurai, 150 years ago. And so to understand exactly how quickly things have evolved in Japan, I think that's really important. It's really important for anyone coming over to understand.
What about language? Should they learn Japanese when they come here?
My Japanese, unfortunately, isn't fluent. It's okay, and I still study Japanese. I speak enough Japanese where I don't offend people for having been here as long as I've been here. I can get by, and I can go and order in restaurants, and I can understand a lot of things that are going on in meetings. I wouldn't lead a meeting necessarily in Japanese because it changes the context and the tone of that meeting. So instead of being someone who adds value for the company, it becomes more of they're more focused on how well you speak Japanese, which I don't want the focus to be on language. I want the focus to be on whatever the issue is. And let's look at the issue, let's fix it, let's move on. I don't want it to be like, wow, he knows that word, or he didn't know that word. Or I want to avoid that.
So what are you suggesting they do? Should they learn, not learn?
I think you should learn enough Japanese. If you can understand the sentiment around what's being said in Japanese, and then you not mimic in a bad way, not sort of copy it, but if you understand the sentiment and you say what's normally said in Japanese, but you say it in English and you mean it, it's going to go a really long way. I think in my experience, Japanese clients, Japanese partners, Japanese vendors, if you speak in a way that they understand you, if you speak clearly enough and you speak slowly enough, and you make sure, especially for people who don't speak English very well, if you do that over time, the more comfortable they are listening to you, the better your relationship is going to be. And if they understand what you're saying, whether you throw some Japanese words in or not, if it's all in English, if they understand what you're saying, they're going to be thrilled to talk to you. They're going to think, look at me, like I understand this guy. Like my English isn't great, but that guy, Greg, I understand him. Like this is great. I want to talk to him more.
It is interesting, isn't it? I've been doing sales in Japan a long time, and I remember I'd go to a particular sales call and understand everything. I thought, this is good. 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, I'm in the next sales call. Can't understand one thing is going on here. And I'm thinking to myself, hang on, did my Japanese suddenly evaporate? What's going on here? And it is really that, isn't it? That some people speak in a way that is very clear that you can actually absorb everything, and other people, very difficult to understand. And your Japanese hasn't changed, or their English hasn't changed. But who do you feel more comfortable with? Well, you obviously feel more comfortable with a guy or gal that you can understand everything they were saying than the person who is incomprehensible. So that's a good point. Are there any other things that you would say to people that they should do when they get to Japan?
I think that if you're dealing with staff or vendors or clients, everyone's always worried about, oh, well, I can't say that in Japan, or I can't do this in Japan, or I should do this, or I should hand my meishi out that way. I really wouldn't worry or focus too much on that. What I would focus on is doing things in moderation. Like, spend time with your staff, but you don't have to spend every night with them drinking. I wouldn't necessarily have them come and visit you at your house, and I wouldn't expect them to invite you either. I'd spend time with them, but I would spend it in a way that is, like I said, is in moderation. And I wouldn't avoid staff, but I would spend time with them. I would temper it so it doesn't feel like it's either forced or fake, but you're also maintaining your position of being president or being shacho, whatever position you've got. That's a little bit of a fine line. But I would also avoid trying to become Japanese in terms of etiquette and trying to figure out how do I build consensus, or which people do I need to talk to so this goes in my direction. I was on a plane years ago when I was going to Korea. There's a Japanese, I think he was an engineer. It's a Japanese engineer, and he's typing out an email on his laptop. And I saw over his shoulder that he was emailing his Korean colleague in Seoul. We're on our way to Seoul. And I'm reading the email. I'm like, God, this is going to be really interesting. Like, how are they ever going to communicate? I mean, Koreans are so direct in general, and Japanese can be so sort of roundabout.
Circular, yeah.
So I said, there's no way they're ever going to have a conversation that makes sense. And I'm reading the email, unfortunately. I apologize for reading it, but I read it. It was the most direct, most straightforward email I think I've ever read. And I was thinking, wow, like, he's using such straightforward language. He's defining the problem. He's talking about how they can solve it, and he's asking for help from his colleague. And I learned a lot from reading that email. And so I'm thinking, if you have an issue, be very straightforward and direct about it, but be respectful, and just keep defining the issue, keep talking about it straightforwardly, and don't try to be circumspect. It's never going to work. It's in my experience, it's never going to work. If that sort of approach is what's necessary, then the company should probably hire a Japanese leader. But even Japanese leaders struggle with that stuff. It's not easy building consensus. It's not easy doing any of that, and it's time consuming, and you might fail. So I would just be honest and direct, keep things in moderation. Don't use big hand movements, right? And be genuine and be approachable, and let staff know that you're on their side and you're trying to help them.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, Greg, for taking us through your career and your insights into leading in Japan. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.